Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Caitlin, and on this channel I upload all sorts of content revolving around true crime, psychology and education. For today's video I'm back with another one of my psychology videos because you guys do seem to really be enjoying these at the minute. Do always let me know if there is a topic that I haven't already covered in a previous video and you want me to kind of cover it and research it relating to psychology. Leave it in the comments, I always read through them and I'm always looking for more topic suggestions for these psychology videos. So for today's video we're going through a topic that has definitely been a very highly requested one, and I don't know if that's just because of the time of year everyone's sort of going back to their studies, and this topic is very widely covered throughout psychology A-levels, degrees, anything. So yeah, we're going to be discussing conformity today. It is going to be a very basic discussion. As I always say with my psychology videos, I'm not giving you like a very high level advanced discussion revolving around this topic. I'm just here to sort of inform you of the basics, maybe introduce you to the concept if you haven't heard of it before. And as I always say with these psychology videos, if it is a topic that you think you're interested in, then definitely go online and do some research. There are so many places you can do research. Even if you use Google Scholar and you just search sort of conformity studies, there will be loads that you can read, like the entire experiment and their findings and conclusions and everything like that. So definitely do your own research if there's a particular topic or anything that I do mention that you do find interesting. But very quickly, as I do with all my videos, I'm just going to zoom through my usual disclaimer. I just like to let you guys know that I'm not claiming to be an expert in this topic, this case, or anything else I cover over on my channel, in particular with psychology videos. I always feel the need to say that I do have a psychology degree. I graduated last year, but that does not mean that I'm claiming to be a psychologist. I'm not a professional. I'm not qualified. It's just an area of interest that I've always had and I've managed to carry it out through my academic years. And I do all my research myself. I use certain sources on the internet, and because obviously only certain sources are accessible to me, it means I may get things wrong, leave things out or mispronounce things, and I apologise if I do any of those. I'm not trying to cause anyone any harm or an injustice. I'm just simply working with the information that I have available to me. So with all that being said, we shall just go ahead and jump straight in discussing the psychology and the topic of conformity. So starting off, what is conformity? Within the field of psychology, the term conformity refers to a form of social influence, and the topic of social influence is a huge one in itself, and I can definitely do other videos sort of isolating bits of information and topics that are covered under the umbrella of social influence. But in particular, conformity specifically refers to an individual changing their behaviours or their attitudes and beliefs in order to fit in with a specific group of other people. People can conform their beliefs both on group pressure that can be applied physically by the presence of the individuals being there, or because of group pressure that is applied through social norms or expectations of this group. So conformity doesn't necessarily have to happen when you're in the presence of someone else from like a different group, let's say, who have this shared belief, and the person does feel the need to conform because they are in the presence of them, but it can also occur when they're just attempting to fit in with the sort of implied social norms of the group. I have here just copied out Eysenk's 2004 definition of conformity from his research. So it says it's as follows: conformity can be defined as yielding to group pressures, something which nearly all of us do at some of the time. Suppose, for example, you go with friends to see a film. You didn't think the film was very good, but all of your friends thought that it was absolutely brilliant. You might be tempted to conform by pretending to agree with their verdict on the film rather than being the odd one out. And I think that just gives a very good basic understanding of the concept of conformity and an example in which it might happen. Conformity can occur in numerous different situations, and over the years researchers and psychologists have narrowed down the concept to 3 different main types. So these are compliance, identification and internalization. And I'm just going to go into a little bit of a breakdown of each of these sort of types. So starting with compliance, this is considered the least drastic and the lowest form of conformity, as the individual will alter their behaviour publicly but their internal private beliefs don't actually change. Because of the nature of this type of conformity, it's not usually a long-term alteration of beliefs and behaviours, so it's very short-term. This type of conformity also specifically relates to something called normative social influence, and this is when individuals conform to be accepted into a group in order to gain acceptance and to meet the expectations of others. So essentially they just don't want to be rejected by this group. And examples of this type of conformity are usually simple, such as stating publicly that you like a genre of music that you privately dislike, or movie genres, a celebrity, anything along those lines. The next type is identification, and this is the next step up in terms of conformity, and it refers to instances in which individuals will change their public behaviours and their private beliefs too, but only while with the said group of individuals. Like compliance, identification typically is a temporary change and relates to normative social influence once again. And one helpful example that I found on one of the sources I read that sort of helps visualise this type of conformity is an individual becomes vegetarian as their new housemates are, but when he finds himself walking alone and walking past a McDonald's, he buys a burger and eats meat away from his housemates. The change in private beliefs is not permanent in this instance, and it only occurs in the presence of specific groups of people. And the third type of conformity is called internalization. So internalization is the most long-term form of conformity, and it refers to when a person alters both their public behaviours and their private beliefs to match those of a certain group. And while the other two types of conformity are usually the result of normative social influence, internalization usually occurs as a result of informational social influence. So this is referring to the alteration of beliefs after being genuinely convinced, usually by some form of evidence or argument by the group they're conforming to. So they genuinely do believe in the change in their beliefs. So for example, someone converting religions as they genuinely agree in the beliefs and the outlook. And so, as I'm sure you've gathered, this is a more permanent type of conformity, as the beliefs and behaviours will have been changed even when the person isn't in the presence of the group. And in relation to conformity, there's just this huge question of why do we conform? As I said before, conformity is a form of social influence that occurs when people alter their beliefs and behaviours to fit in with a group of others. But over the years, psychologists have attempted to understand why people do this, why people conform, and there are usually a number of different potential reasons. So the first two are the two terms that I mentioned previously, so normative and informational social influence. So normative social influence is caused by a need to gain acceptance and to meet others' expectations, while informational is caused by a genuine acceptance of the beliefs of the group. On one source I read, they listed 3 reasons in which informational social influence can occur specifically, and these 3 reasons were: the right course of action is clear but there isn't one right obvious answer, the situation is a crisis and you need to make a fast decision, and the third one is we believe the others to be experts. So if we think the people we are conforming to know what they're talking about, we are more likely to conform to their beliefs. And aside from normative and informational social influence, something called the social impact theory is suggested as another reason as to why we may conform. Social impact theory was developed by a psychologist called Latan, and it offers an explanation as to why individuals may find themselves conforming in certain situations while other people don't. And this theory introduces 3 factors as being important into understanding why some people may conform in certain situations. The first one is the number of people, so a higher number of people being present that support the conforming view, the greater levels of conformity. Number 2 is the strength, so the more important the people are to the individual, the higher levels of conformity. And number 3 is the immediacy, so an individual will have greater influence if the group they are trying to influence is smaller, so someone will influence a group of 5 people easier than a group of 50. And this theory specifically has been researched significantly, and it does appear to be a relatively supported concept. And the last sort of portion of this video, I want to go over some of the research studies that have been carried out in relation to the field of conformity. Obviously, as with every topic in psychology, there are so many pieces of research that have been carried out, and if you do want to look into some of the others, then I definitely recommend you do your own research. But here, all I've got is kind of like the main ones that are associated with conformity. They're ones that I learned in like A level when I first started studying psychology, so they're kind of considered like the core studies that are related to the concept. One of the earliest studies carried out in relation to conformity was in the year 1932 by Jennes. I apologise if I mispronounced that. He had collected his participants and asked them to individually estimate how many beans there were inside of a glass bottle that he'd placed in front of them. After collecting these individual estimated accounts, he then gathered the participants into a group setting and then asked them to estimate the number of beans in that same jar, but this time he'd allowed them to discuss their answers with one another. So he then gained a group answer. The group had to decide on a number of beans within the jar, and then after this he once again asked them to estimate individually. And this set of answers allowed him to establish whether their answers would be altered by the group environment. So when he'd asked them to estimate once again in an independent setting, he'd asked them if they'd like to change their original estimate or stick with the estimate provided by the group or give a new one entirely, and nearly all of the participants changed their estimates to match or just be slightly closer to the group estimate given. So that's just an interesting study to consider, because even though when they were asked their final estimate, they were in an individual setting, they weren't in front of any other people, but the majority did still conform. And one of the most well-known studies in the field of conformity was carried out by Ash in 1951. I do have a video on my channel from a couple of years ago that I dedicated specifically to this experiment, so I will leave a link to that below if you'd like to learn about that in detail. But essentially, Ash's experiment had been developed in response to Sheriff's 1935 study known as the autokinetic effect experiment. In short, Sheriff's experiment had shown participants a visual illusion called the autokinetic effect, which is where a small dot of light is projected onto a screen in a dark room and it will seem like it's moving even though it's not. Participants were asked to estimate how far they believed the light had moved, both individually and then once again in groups of 3. The results of this study found that when in a group setting, the person whose estimate was farthest from the other two when asked individually, they would conform their answers to match the others. He concluded that individuals will more commonly conform and meet a group agreement in situations rather than answering individually. But the main reason for Ash's study to have been developed had been that since there was actually no correct answer to the question that Sheriff had asked his participants in his experiment, as the light never actually moved on the wall, how can it be confidently confirmed that the individual conformed and not just that they changed their answer themselves? They had thought about it and worked out in their brain maybe a different sort of distance, if that makes sense. And then from this, Ash created his study. Ash did also carry out further research in order to investigate any potential situational factors that may affect conformity in individuals. So in 1956, Ash's research discovered that the size of the group influenced whether people conformed to the group's answers. And in the same year, he also discovered that the presence of an ally, so someone else going against the shared group response, had the ability to reduce conformity rates drastically. It was also found that answering in private following a group setting also typically reduced conformity rates more often, as there weren't as many pressures from the group, nor did they have the fear of rejection from the group. And finally, he found that if the task given to individuals, such as the one in Ash's study, is harder, so in that case in Ash's study there was a line displayed to the participants and then 3 comparison lines of different lengths, and they were asked which of the 3 comparison lines matched the original line shown. So he found that if this task was made harder, so if the lines of the comparison lines were similar in length and it was harder to tell which one matched the original, individuals were much more likely to conform since it was harder for them to judge their own response and they'd feel the need to put their trust in other people's responses. So yes, that is where I'm going to end today's video. I hope you guys found this interesting. Like I said, it is just sort of a basic understanding of conformity, but it is a whole huge topic in itself for you to kind of go down the rabbit hole and research individual factors and things relating to it. But I hope you did find this interesting, and like I said, let me know if you do have any other topics you'd like me to cover down below. So thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you found this interesting, and I'll see you guys very soon for another video. Thanks for watching. Bye.